Welcome to today's Editor Series presentation, Ensuring the Continuous Supply of Quality Drug Products During Uncertain Times. I'm Rita Peters, Editorial Director of Pharmaceutical Technology and BioPharm International. I'll be joined by Senior Editor Agnes Shanley for this discussion about how drug companies are managing operations, compliance, and supply chains during the COVID-19 pandemic. In this event, experts involved in biopharma operations, manufacturing and supply chain operations, regulatory compliance, advanced technology, and business continuity share insights into current challenges as well as long-term implications for drug development and manufacturing. This webcast is presented by Pharmaceutical Technology and BioPharm International in conjunction with Interfex. Interfex is the premier pharmaceutical, biotechnology, and device development and manufacturing event to experience science through commercialization via exhibits, networking, and a conference to leverage quality, efficiency, and cost effectiveness. The 2020 event is scheduled for July 15th to the 17th at the Javits Center in New York. You can view updates to conference sessions and exhibits, including 4 keynote sessions presented by Pharmaceutical Technology and BioPharm International at www.interfex.com. I have a few important announcements before we begin. You can enlarge the slide window by clicking on the small square icon in the upper right-hand corner, or you can hover your mouse over the lower right-hand corner and drag the window to the desired size. The slides will advance automatically during the event. Additional information to support biopharma development and manufacturing during the pandemic can be found in the resources section. You can also find information from sponsors of this event. During the webcast, we'll invite audience members to participate in several poll questions. You can share your opinions through these polls by making a selection directly on the screen. If you have any technical problems viewing or hearing the presentation, please click on the question mark Help widget in the dock at the bottom of your presentation window. We appreciate the support of sponsors of this event, and I'd like to share some descriptions. AbbVie Contract Manufacturing has been serving as a trusted partner for more than 40 years across 10 manufacturing facilities in North America and Europe. The company's contract development and manufacturing capabilities span both small and large molecule APIs, including classical fermentation, chemical synthesis, biologics, and ADCs. In addition to APIs, the company offers extensive experience in technical solutions in the area of drug product manufacturing, which includes traditional tablet and capsule production, potent, hot melt extrusion, and fill finish. The company can package products regionally. Applied Materials Smart Factory RX is Industry 4.0 software designed to enable pharma manufacturers to unlock their plant's full potential by providing real-time advanced analytics, predictive maintenance, and automated adaptive scheduling. This unique solution allows companies to respond to plant floor and market changes in the most optimal way, resulting in improved quality, throughput, and profitability. Progressive pharma companies are using Smart Factory RX and Applied's expert pharma services to realize plant of the future benefits today. Honeywell's advanced automation and process controls help life sciences manufacturers maintain auditability and traceability, optimize production, and increase speed to market while focusing on quality and repeatability. Data capture, recording, and reporting solutions simplify and safeguard GMP compliance. Fast-track production startup with flexible and scalable automation systems, insight into upcoming events or delays, easy troubleshooting, remote asset management, and embedded cybersecurity. An experienced SCADA system used for electronic clinical trial data collection can be scaled up into a DCS system when needed. So thanks again to our sponsors. You can find more information about them in the Resources tab. A quick look at our agenda today. We'll be discussing how biopharma has been stepping up during the pandemic, challenges under emergency conditions, planning for pandemics, supply chain issues, regulatory compliance, and technologies that are advancing manufacturing. Sharing their insights today are these experts from different facets of the pharmaceutical value chain. We'll hear from them throughout the presentation. You'll find their biographies in the Resources tab on your presentation screen. The coronavirus pandemic has stressed healthcare systems globally, and the word heroic is insufficient to describe the efforts of frontline medical professionals and first responders to treat patients and save lives. Biopharmaceutical development and manufacturing professionals stand next in line in the battle. The industry faces a multi-pronged challenge during this pandemic. Developing prophylactic treatments such as vaccines, repurposing existing drugs to treat patients with the virus, ensuring an adequate supply of commodity medications, and continuing development of new therapies for other diseases and conditions. And biopharma companies must conduct this research and development under the pressure from patients, politicians, and the public, who may not be familiar with the pace of science-based drug development. Since January 10, 2020, when the genome of the virus was released, biopharma companies and research organizations have announced development programs for more than 115 vaccines. At the same time, developers and clinicians are evaluating the potential of scores of commercial drugs to be repurposed and used to treat COVID-19. FDA has issued more than 20 guidance documents related to the pandemic, primarily related to hand sanitizers, personal protection equipment, medical devices, and clinical trials. Pharma companies, including Merck, Pfizer, and Eli Lilly, encourage qualified employees to volunteer in healthcare roles. And suppliers have adopted technologies and programs to foster remote inspections and communications. In addition, FDA has set guidance for compounders that are formulating scarce drugs at the local level. United States Pharmacopeia has been working closely with the agency and issuing guidance to compounders for formulating hand sanitizer and a number of other areas. In the same time frame, 12 new drugs have been approved, which is more than the number approved in the same time frame in 2019. This is an indication that the business of pharma continues amid the crisis. However, 12 drugs have been recalled for quality issues, and some drug shortages have been reported due both to the increased demand for potential therapies and ongoing API impurity issues. While FDA has suspended routine inspections, the agency expects pharma companies to maintain quality standards under less than optimal conditions. In addition, the agency has instructed companies to assess entire supply chains and alert the agency for any potential shortages. Now, our audience members would like to get you involved and take part in our first poll. Again, you can select your answer directly on the screen and then click Submit. So here's the question. How has the COVID-19 pandemic affected your drug development or manufacturing operations? Have you shut down all operations, reduced development or manufacturing operations, suspended or delayed clinical trials, modified work schedules or production to accommodate social distancing, accelerated R&D for vaccines or therapies to treat the coronavirus, increased production of existing therapies, or no significant changes? Again, the question is, how has the COVID-19 pandemic affected your drug development and manufacturing operations? You shut down all operations, reduced development or manufacturing operations, suspended or delayed clinical trials, modified work schedules or production to accommodate social distancing, accelerated R&D for vaccines or therapies to treat the coronavirus, increased production of existing essential therapies, or no significant change. So we'll give you a few more seconds to make your selection and click Submit. and we will be sharing the results online following this event, and we thank you very much for participating. At this point, I am going to turn the presentation over to Senior Editor Agnes Shanley.
Travel bans, restricted access to facilities, and supply chain disruptions are just a few of the challenges facing drug companies, contract service providers, and regulatory authorities that must provide essential medicines under adverse conditions while protecting their employees and adhering to good manufacturing practices. A number of workhorse drugs are already in short supply. David Light, CEO of ValSure, an analytical pharmacy that batch tests all medicines from distributors prior to sending them to patients, summarized how the pandemic has added complexity to the already steep challenges of maintaining a safe and adequate supply of medicines. Light also stressed the importance of investing in a robust VPN, one that features encryption and other capabilities that are invisible to the user in order to ensure the data security and integrity required for remote work. Here are some key points that David made in a recent interview.
From the pharmacy perspective, it's also already had significant impact. I mean, the drugs that are specifically, believed to be effective on COVID. Obviously, there haven't been, the standard kind of clinical trials that you'd expect for these kinds of things. So, point is that, every time that these announcements gets made that is, touting these drugs, it has a profound impact on the supply chain. So, we saw complete shortages of drugs like hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine for like a week at a time, where you couldn't get it from any distributor. Nowadays, most of them seem to at least be on being rationed. So, the distributors only allow certain amounts to be bought by, and I'm sure different clients in different amounts, but certain states have restrictions. And states have instituted restrictions, and there's been a lot of impact to a variety of different drugs. So, hydroxychloroquine, I think, gets the most attention, at least lately. But, drugs like losartan have also been proposed, and losartan is also on ration, which is particularly concerning because, hydroxychloroquine obviously has other uses than just the malaria drugs, but it is not a major drug used in the United States. Losartan, however, is the number 9 most prescribed drug in the U.S. And certainly, obviously, we're concerned about the thousands of people that have severe COVID symptoms, and doctors should have the ability to prescribe what they need. However, there's millions of Americans that rely on losartan specifically for treating hypertension and related conditions. So the fact that drugs like that could be susceptible to shortages and are even now being rationed, I think, is concerning. Losartan itself is also one of the main, our medications that continues to have contamination problems. I think all of these COVID issues bring to light, again, the issues of drug quality and safety. All these nitrosamines, issues that we've been talking about a lot, were all happening when there was no crisis. Now imagine what's going on when they're scrambling to fill billions of dollars of back orders, and the FDA has no inspectors, and they're removing bans from companies that were previously banned, specifically for drugs like hydroxychloroquine. So I think there's also been a lot of concern now about counterfeits as well. There's such a rush to get these kinds of medications out there that we're hearing this not just from patients but also health systems. That they're buying from places they don't normally buy from, and they're trying to do everything they can to try and get these medications. And who knows what's in them or what's there's certainly growing concern So we have been utilizing a lot of VPN access. So, I'm sure a lot of these facilities, and us included, especially with the pharmacy, having HIPAA compliance as part of our standard workflow. We have a lot of concern over data integrity and security, but there are specific VPN technologies that have built that in. So you can't just download any old app and be security compliant.
Right.
But we've invested in those previously, and now they've actually really paid dividends in enabling people to still be somewhat productive from home. And they're able to, at the very least, analyze data that are stored on our secure servers, or even operate machinery to some degree. A technician can load samples, and then a more advanced operator can actually input the parameters that they want to investigate remotely by logging in. So the VPN access has been pretty useful to, I think you're totally right that especially in this business, it's a unique challenge to keep people productive when the vast majority of the work has to be in the office, in the lab, in person. And we see that in our laboratory, in our pharmacy. You can't take an LCMS to your garage to do it at home, and you can't fill pill bottles at home either.
The pandemic has also posed changes to day-to-day operations. For many companies, the greatest challenges are the speed of changes coming at them and the dominant concern about shortages. Ron Najafi, CEO of Emory Pharma, a contract research lab and drug development consultancy, shared some frustrations that drug companies are experiencing as they work through the pandemic, as well as concerns about the future. What challenges has this placed on you in terms of running your company, running your labs, communicating with clients and just managing business?
So I can just count them for you. It's been challenging. Number one, social distancing is challenging.
Oh yeah.
When you have to share data with somebody or have a conversation about certain data, you need to get close to them. You need to show them certain things, or you need to, it's just hard.
Yeah.
And also, it makes for a very difficult, sort of scheduling, because now not everybody can work together. So we work in multiple shifts. And, so we have to schedule who's going to be there at the lab today, who's going to be there tomorrow. So it's a scheduling issue, and not everybody, so we don't have the benefit of being together and having a productive conversation. We do a lot of Zoom meetings. We do a lot of conference calls, a lot of one-on-one telephone. I go to the lab maybe once or twice a week for a few hours. But they generally don't want me there because they say, look, if you can handle your work by phone, don't come to work. So it's just, it's very challenging. But the new challenge is going to be really, some of our clients are going to have difficulty raising money. Because a number of VCs are kind of pulling back. Basically, investors don't like uncertainty, so they just hold back. Number two, so that's just like we're experiencing shortage of masks and various things. There's also shortage of gloves, shortage of solvents. We needed some alcohol, for the work we do. And, it's on back order until end of May.
Mm-hmm.
So there's going to be shortages.
We now invite you to take our second audience poll, which examines the current challenges that operations are having during the pandemic. What are some of the current challenges that your biopharma facility is encountering during the pandemic? Shortages of materials or equipment, staffing shortages, scheduling, lack of regulatory guidance and information, social distancing, communicating with remote staff, interfacing with operations and lab staff, increased workload. I'll read the selections again. What are some of the current challenges your biopharma facility is encountering during the pandemic? Shortages of materials or equipment, staffing shortages, scheduling, lack of regulatory guidance and information, social distancing, communicating with remote staff, interfacing with operators and lab staff, or increased workload. Please mark your answer, and we will release the results of the poll after the program. Thank you. Going to move on. Thank you so much for participating in the poll, and we will share the results online as mentioned before. The last large-scale global pandemic occurred a century ago. Therefore, COVID-19 caught businesses and governments by surprise, says business continuity consultant Steve Goldman. Most natural or man-made disasters are localized and of shorter duration. The global scope and indeterminate length of a pandemic presents multiple challenges, especially for industries that play a key role in resolving the crisis. Biopharma companies should consider pandemics in overall business continuity strategies and also the need for clear planning in phasing in the return to normal. Involving supply chain partners and regulators in these discussions is crucial, he says. Goldman expects social distancing to continue in the workplace and beyond for quite a while longer. Now that companies have seen that remote work can be done without sacrificing productivity, he says, the practice should continue even among companies that might not have supported the concept initially. Steve shared the following insights with Pharmaceutical Technology. Do you think that pandemics, we haven't had a major one in 100 years, but do you see that this has to be folded into business continuity and risk mitigation plans now, the possibility of a pandemic? Never mind the fact that governments should be, better prepared, but do you see this becoming a part of the standard strategy for, business continuity?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, the smarter companies already had a pandemic plan in place prior to this occurring. The problem is we would factor in work from home and factor in 50% of your staff isn't there, not a problem. What didn't factor in was a complete shutdown of all the services and the complete unavailability of people even to show up to work. So that's now like the next level of pandemic that people need to look into. But yeah, it should have been part of their plan. Pandemic should have been part of the response plan. I've done several of these for other, for companies, and now they're happy. But the point is, from now on, this is clearly going to be part of future business continuity plans. The most important thing I'd be looking at now is when this is over and people start returning back to their organizations, each company, each group needs to do a post-pandemic review, a critique, an evaluation of how they did. Talk with people, get interviews with all your key executives, all your key people, in fact, just about anybody. What did we do? How did it work? What didn't work? How can we improve? Set up a critique where people sit and talk about that. Gather all the documents, all the files, all the information, and then develop and issue your post-pandemic action plan. Here's what we did well. Here's what needs to be improved. Here's how we're going to fix things for the future. Upgrade your business continuity plan, your pandemic response plan. Get ready for the next one.
Drug shortages are an ongoing concern. A pandemic increases the likelihood that such shortages will occur. On February 27, 2020, FDA announced the first alert from a drug manufacturer of a drug shortage due to an issue with the manufacturing of an API. With such heavy dependence on manufacturers in Asia, such shortages should be anticipated. On March 27, 2020, FDA issued a guidance to assist applicants and manufacturers in providing timely notifications about changes in the production of certain drugs and biological products to help prevent or mitigate shortages of drug products. For technology providers such as Cytiva, formerly GE Healthcare, which experienced a change in ownership during the pandemic's initial weeks, communication with vendors has been crucial. Vendors need to educate their suppliers on the importance of their products to the overall public health effort and to remain in close communication in order to stay ahead of changing global regulations. Cytiva's VP of Supply Chain, Mary Blen, shares some examples.
Yeah, I think when you look at this global pandemic, it's very different than any what I'll call natural disaster, which we've seen through the years, whether it be, the tsunami or the volcano in Iceland. Those are very regionalized and can be managed, whether it be through redundancies in your supply chain or through safety stocks or things like that. When we look at this global pandemic, it's really hitting all facets from suppliers to customers to employees. And as I mentioned, it is evolving every day. I think for us, one of the biggest areas that we've been spending a lot of time focusing on has been logistics. Every day as we meet, we're trying to understand what are the rules and regulations within the various countries and what are their requirements. I'll just give one example. A week ago Friday, China added some restrictions on various PPE like masks that could be exported for their country. If the manufacturer wasn't registered and didn't have the proper credentials, you were not allowed to export that product. So in those cases, we are stepping in and we're working with some of our suppliers to help them, through some of those government mazes that we're probably more accustomed to. We've also worked with other suppliers who maybe don't have the logistics infrastructure that we have, and we've agreed to, take title of our raw materials at their manufacturing sites and then manage the logistics through the rest of the way, which is something that they maybe would normally handle. So I think it's really about understanding your customers, understanding your suppliers, and being able to work together for common solutions.
Yes. Well, can you give any examples of areas where you're working, where you're partnering with, with the other suppliers?
So one of the things that we do, we've got suppliers in Asia that create critical raw materials for us. And what we've done there is we go to partner with them. We may not be their largest customer by volume, but we want to make sure that they're aware that we're probably one of the more critical customers based on what we do. So, when we talk to our suppliers, we really talk in three facets. One is how do we educate them? How do we then continue to communicate? And then how do we foster relationships? So when I talk about educating, it really is about reminding the suppliers on what we do, because what we do in our business really does matter, right? We're helping our customers advance and accelerate the development of life-saving therapeutics. A lot of our customers are working on therapies just for the COVID-19. Some are also in the midst of clinical trials. Many of our customers have FDA products already on the market that patients depend on each and every day. So, we take a lot of time to educate our suppliers on what that means and what role we play in it, which also means what role they play in it. Because without them, we can't help to provide these solutions. So that's part of the educational piece. And then we also communicate. Some of our suppliers, we make large-scale equipment like stainless steel vessels for our mixers and our bioreactors. The industry of stainless steel, is not something that's prevalent within kind of the global world. Like, we're not a world leader in procuring of stainless steel. So when we talk to these vendors and suppliers, we're providing appropriate documentation, right? So as everyone's heard about essential and non-essential employees or workers. And in some cases, they may view themselves as being non-essential because they may not understand the role of what they make and how it pertains. So we're able to provide documentation to these suppliers to say, here's what you manufacture, here's the product that it goes into, and here's why it's essential, and here's why we need you to continue to run and operate. So by communicating that, it's very, I think, helpful for them and for us. And then the last piece really is around fostering good relationships. We have great relationships with our customers. I think we've got really great relationships with our suppliers. And we need to get to know both of them to become partners so we can scale and grow together. It's really important for our suppliers to understand that our customers start off in kind of academic research, and then as they grow through the growth of their products, it turns into large-scale biologics and commercial manufacturing. So we have to have an understanding with our suppliers that they need to be with us on that journey. And so having those relationships with these suppliers just allows for good, candid conversations, and it allows for, longer-term forecasting and strategic planning.
In the early days of the pandemic, as travel restrictions shut down site visits and forced the postponement of industry meetings, on-site equipment qualification, and customer meetings, industry suppliers announced technology-inspired programs to enable remote meetings and collaborations. Both internally and in activities involving supply chain partners, innovative technology, particularly video-based programs, allow operations once handled on-site to be handled remotely. One example is supplier audits. Another is factory acceptance tests. Trends that have been underway in the industry for the past decade have enabled the use of innovative collaborative technology. Angelo Straquantano, CEO of Apprentice.io, a company that offers augmented reality and collaborative communications tools, discusses these changes.
So what's really interesting about this pandemic is that over the last, call it 10 years, the level of interconnectivity of this industry has greatly increased. And the reliance on partners, on vendors, on global supply chains, on subject matter experts, this whole interconnected weave has created a situation where when those same individuals can't travel internationally, domestically, locally, and even within the same facility, we're seeing challenges pop up that are both wholly new and both very challenging in themselves. And so the key areas that we're seeing companies now try to solve for to ensure that supply chains are running and humming and that we don't run into worldwide drug shortages, even though we are starting to see some evidence of that in a few areas. But the key challenges, in particular, when you have this knowledge that is initially dispersed, but where that knowledge now can't get physically to the facility, into the lab, or into the manufacturing suite, it's created some really unique situations within life sciences that I do believe are a little bit unprecedented, at least at this scale. The impact across so many organizations, so many different components of their life cycle, it really is a unique challenge. And a lot of those challenges center around, for example, how do you tech transfer during this pandemic? How do you typically take teams that would be sent physically to one location or another? How do you do that in a scenario like this? How do you then collaborate with your CDMO, and where you would typically go out and audit in person and be with your CDMO in person as you're going through this process? How do you then troubleshoot when your vendor can't actually get to you and sends their senior service rep to your facility? And then even more localized, what happens when your supervisors or some of your executive leadership at an actual site can't physically get there to then interact with the team, monitor trends, and see what's really going on to ultimately provide a level of support, guidance, troubleshooting, mentoring, and training all in person. And so it is in and of itself a very unique challenge. And so, what we've been seeing is on our side of the business, we've been seeing a huge shift, a shift that we believe is actually quite material, not just temporary, a shift towards using emerging technologies to be able to solve these challenges to ensure supply chain preservation. Because ultimately, what this technology can now do is allow organizations to be able to collaborate effectively, guide effectively, support effectively, train effectively remotely while they're in their homes, but be able to have a view into the manufacturing suite or into the lab, such that then the operations staff or the scientists can collaborate with those subject matter experts, those vendors, those CDMOs, all those other key critical individuals that are helping to ensure that drug production stays on task on time. So it's a really unique, interesting situation that's going on right now. Back in January, we have a number of customers that are in China, and our team was going to be flying out there to set up new sites and work on new deployments. But of course, that started to impact our operations pretty early on in 2020. But then all of a sudden, we started to see this kind of domino effect happen within the industry. Our other customers who are not necessarily headquartered in China stopped flights to China, then internationally, then domestically, then locally. And all this happened before governments even responded. So as we started to see this unfold, our customers approached us saying, hey guys, we're not going to be able to travel here. We're really concerned about our supply chain preservation, help us out. And so we actually retooled our whole product to be able to deploy remotely, support remotely, configure remotely, train remotely, deploy remotely. And we had to really shift our own internal operations to a wholly new mindset. Because if we were going to be in a position where we could actually support our customers through this crisis and allow them to leverage this technology to keep their supply chains open, we had to turn on a dime, and that's really where this development of these rapid deployment kits came into play, because they are wholly pre-configured, pre-packaged, pre-loaded, pre-everything, and they're literally just, as soon as you get them out of the box, you can then get up and running that same day. And then we can perform our training remotely through our own software, which we completely had to retool, so that this way now our customers who then around February are starting to say, hey, wait a second, what are we going to do here if we can't have those aforementioned vendors, subject matter experts, all those tech transfers happen. They have huge schedules that have been put into place here, huge moving schedules. And so thankfully, we were able to execute on that by towards the end of February, and then we launched all of them globally throughout March and now into April. And so the collaboration component has been really key for this whole crisis. But really interestingly, beyond the collaboration, we have a whole new kind of way of thinking about drug manufacturing, where we call it intelligent batch execution, augmented procedures, and predictive resource management. And we're seeing the very early signs of organizations saying, hey, wait a second, the way that we were doing things pre-COVID aren't really flexible enough to allow us to adapt to changing market demands. And so we're starting to see this additional shift, kind of the second wave, where organizations need tools to be able to very quickly adapt to changes in supply chain, changes in production runs, changes in where drugs will be physically made due to any number of circumstances. So it's a really fascinating type of setup, but really, it was spurred on by our customers coming to us and saying, hey guys, we need help here.
Rita will now continue with the program.
Thank you very much, Agnes. Now we want to look at some activities that have been going on at FDA and report on an update that they provided on April 16th. The Center for Veterinary Medicine said it does not anticipate a change in its ability to meet performance goals during the pandemic. The agency has issued a guidance on the conduct and review of studies to support new animal drug development. The CDER and CBER staffs are working at full capacity, FDA reports, and as of mid-April was meeting key review program user fee performance goals, approving applications, and communicating with applicants. The agency reported it was using technology and using agreements with foreign counterparts to minimize the impact of applications under review. However, FDA also reported, and this is a quote from the report, with many staff working on COVID-19 activities, it is possible that we will not be able to sustain our current level of performance indefinitely. However, if there is an increase in drug shortages and supply disruptions, we'll be ready to reprioritize more of this work as necessary, end quote. So with routine U.S. and international inspections suspended by FDA, facilities will need to sharpen their risk management strategies in order to balance the need for efficiency with those of product quality and patient safety. To discuss this more, we talked with Susan Schneep, a distinguished fellow for Regulatory Compliance Associates and also Pharmaceutical Technologies Ask the Expert columnist, and she shared some insight and recommendations for biopharma companies. FDA has suspended routine on-site inspections, both domestically and internationally, during the pandemic. So what does this mean for biopharma manufacturing facilities?
Oh, Rita, I think that's a great question. I actually think what it means is they have to step up their internal audit game. Now, I'm not suggesting that they pretend that they're the FDA and do internal audits that way, but I think they need to pay a little bit more attention to what they do internally as an audit program and begin to look at things that the FDA might, and solve problems that the FDA might have found during a routine inspection. So they're going to be their own best auditor and act on their own best behalf by identifying the issue, bringing it to management's attention, and fixing the problem before FDA resumes routine inspections. I think it also means for some companies that might have the same type of issues going on at multiple sites, that they may be doing a little more virtual integration of their systems. In other words, some online streaming to see conditions that might exist at a facility with the auditors based in a different location. So I think there's going to be a lot more sharing among sites, companies that have multiple sites, in terms of solving things that could be company-wide. And I think there'll be, they should certainly look at improving their game or upping their game in terms of what the internal audit program looks like.
So what must be done to maintain good manufacturing practices and satisfy regulatory authorities when you have limited staffing, you may be on modified shifts, you're required to implement social distancing in facilities?
I think this is a real interesting, I think you need to stay on your same level of GMPs, and I think you can satisfy the regulatory authorities by, even if you have limited staffing, if we take limited staffing and modified shifts, you're still going to have the ability to have people looking at and observing operations. And I think that's going to become very important. The more people work remotely from home, particularly like if you're in quality assurance, the more it becomes important for communication to be increased and visual enhancements to be done so that people can actually see what's going on, what's being talked about without showing up to the office. And I think social distancing, if you have operations or steps in your operation that require someone to observe a step that's being performed, in other words, you have the operator doing the step and another person observing it real time, we're going to have to get clever about how we do that observation. Is it through a camera? Is it through a live video feed? I think that all of these things need to be considered, and I think people need to. We're going to be making decisions quickly about how to stay and maintain a compliant facility and compliant operations. And so I think people need to codify what their thought process was and justify and defend based on citations, literature they've looked up, and I don't mean literature like expert paper, but their own internal validation procedures, their own investigations procedures that might have prompted a change. All of this becomes literature that supports how to modify or make accommodations to your operating procedure and still remain in compliance according to the GMPs.
Now, some facilities may need to make changes to their manufacturing equipment, their processes, their materials. There are a lot of questions about supply chain availability. So it brings up the question of revalidation of these processes. So how should manufacturers approach these changes?
So I think this is a great time to really if you don't have one, it's really a great time to put into place a risk management plan. A risk-based decision-making is going to be very critical to continue operations and manufacturing processes. I think if you don't have one, you need to have one. If you don't have one, start one, document it. If you have one, make sure it's robust, pull it out. These things, these quality risk management plans, contingency plans, they need to be utilized now. They should have helpful information. Pull out your validation information from 5-10 years ago, investigation. All of that should help you, give you a background, give you information, and help you make the right decisions to keep operating and to determine, are these materials safe? Do I need to do more? Do I need to do less? It's also, a great time to look at your supplier histories. What have you seen? This is now the time to be extremely transparent as an organization and as a facility with everything. Whatever quality, people should know everything about what's going on. So quality needs to be transparent with manufacturing when they have a concern about a material. Quality and it needs to be transparent with their suppliers if they have any concerns about the supplier, past performance of the supplier. They also need to be transparent about what kinds of investigations they have done that might have resulted from materials from the supplier. All of this information needs to be put on the table, needs to be absorbed, needs to be used to make appropriate risk-based decisions, and needs to be shared so that everyone has the complete picture and the full story.
So, say deviations do occur, what must be documented?
I think the same things that were documented before. I wouldn't change the deviation documentation procedure unless, of course, you have a very weak system and you're not documenting your deviations appropriately. But if you have a strong, robust quality system, you're going to continue to document deviations. Where you might have some issues and you need to clearly take a look at it is in timing. Many companies require or have requirements in SOPs that say, deviations, we should have them done in 90 days. Well, there is no time frame from a GMP perspective. There's nothing written in the regs that says, all your deviations, all your investigations have to be done in 90 days. That's a self-imposed industry requirement. So knowing that you're going to have limited staff, you're going to have modified shifts, you're not going to have people necessarily at the facility to interview on time, you may want to look at not having that create documentation problems for you in terms of wrapping up a deviation. It's now not a time to be worried about, am I going to get this done in 90 days, as much as it is to be worried about whether you have investigated thoroughly, talked to everybody you needed to talk to, came up with a root cause, came up with an action plan. Now's the time to make sure that you're worried about the right things. Don't lose sight of the deviation and the problem just because you're worried about my SOP says I have to have this done in 90 days. We need to really focus on the right things now and not the wrong things, the compliant things, the things that make the operation better, not, whether I used red ink or blue ink or black ink to make my notation.
Do you anticipate that regulatory authorities are going to exercise some discretion in situations that might pop up during the current emergency? And if yes, you have some examples.
I think they will, and I think it will very much depend on what the situation is in terms of what they would allow discretion under the circumstances. I have to think that I'm trying to come up with a scenario where they were, and the best I can come up with is something that happened a while ago to me, and it has nothing to do with the pandemic. It's just a situation where, there was certain regulatory discretion. So I did have a product where we had a cosmetic defect, and because of the nature of the product, it was a leukemia maintenance drug, and it was going off the market because there was no manufacturer for the API. And during the manufacturing, there were 3 lots of API material left. And during the manufacturing of one of those lots, there was a cosmetic defect that arose. And so in that case, the decision that was made was to suspend that criteria, that cosmetic defects, and release the product because people, on leukemia drugs to transition from one drug to another could take some time and could take multiple iterations. So the objective was to get as much product available to the physician so that the transition from one leukemia maintenance drug to another could take place and in a safe manner. And we didn't shortchange anybody of what they were normally taking while they found a new and safe drug. I think circumstances like that, where you have life-saving medicine and something like a cosmetic defect comes up during operation. I had another situation where the stopper, there was a little rubber drip on a stopper, but it was secured to the stopper. It wasn't coming off. It was there was a defect in the mold, and it created this little teardrop at the end of the stopper. Something like that has no impact on the product quality or the potency of the product. It just looks a little ugly. If we have those situations and it's a life-saving medicine, I think we need to have our own discretions and say, this is still releasable, and the alternative is to have a drug shortage, and we don't need that. We're already with imports not coming in from various countries. There's already, medically necessary products that are going under drug shortage. So we have to look at these things. Sometimes what we might reject a product for, we might not do it under these extraordinary circumstances.
So if a drug license holder is outsourcing development and manufacturing functions, how do they maintain oversight of their service providers given travel and access restrictions?
Well, I think this is we're going to be facing this even when we come out and we've solved the problem of the virus and the pandemic. I think we're still going to be, some of the things we put into place during these times will remain. So one of the things is frequent conversations with these people. Set up conference calls monthly, weekly. I would advise as often as you need to. Just make sure have the calling tree, who to talk to, what to talk to them about, and talk to them frequently. I think live streaming and team meetings and live video streaming of operations so that people can see things real time. Many facilities, in fact, I don't know of very many today that don't have some sort of a camera or recording capabilities. Those things are going to be critical in moving forward for people to be able to monitor what's going on with their product, the license holder to be able to communicate effectively with their provider when something happens and it needs to be shared, right? So I think reworking quality agreements to allow for live streaming, video streaming, exchange of taped recordings, I think that's going to be very important that non-disclosure agreements probably even need to be looked at. But I think we're in the day of drone. Some of the service providers might want to consider flying a drone. I know there's a lot of, things that it raises a lot of questions. How do you introduce it into the manufacturing facility? How do you sterilize it? But hey, it's coming. If I could fly a drone over the lines and stream that to my client, that might be one way to handle some of the virtual world that we're in and communicating the right information. I don't know if anybody's introduced a drone, but hey, it's out there. It's, we have to start thinking beyond what we know. It's time to the way we operated before the pandemic is going to change, and how we operated during this pandemic, it's going to change how we operate moving forward. And I expect to see a lot more of video conferencing, a lot more exchange of recorded information, more robust non-disclosures agreements, because I think people will be taping areas of the facility that may never have been taped or shared before. So I think that's how you get a handle on it, and you talk to your service provider if you are the license holder, and you say, this is what I need to see, this is what I'd like to see. If you are the service provider, you need to make sure that you have the capability to provide information, required information to the license holder, and that would include pictures and video recordings of your operations.
Now, I'm going to kick it back to Agnes to talk about additional pandemic efforts.
Thank you, Rita. The United States Pharmacopoeia has been stepping up its involvement to help drug developers and manufacturers and regulators better address the challenges posed by this pandemic. For those developing brand new therapies, USP has been helping with guidances, standards, and assay development. In the following section, Jaap Venema, USP's Chief Scientific Officer, discusses some efforts that have been underway. In addition, USP has been working closely with FDA to provide guidance for local compounders that will be formulating some of the drugs in short supply, including analgesics and muscle relaxants. Jaap and his colleague, Carrie Herney, Director of Advocacy at USP, discussed these initiatives in greater depth.
First and foremost, one thing we've done, we published a essentially call for collaboration on our website, and also through targeted outreach to those companies or manufacturers that we know are developing treatments or vaccines. And our offering is to offer free technical assistance to help them, whether they need to develop assays or tests or are in some way in need of services or materials related to medicine quality. So that's one thing we're doing. Secondly, we're also aware that by using some of our standards, again, both documentary and reference standards, we know from previous data, from surveys and from contacts with manufacturers, that using these types of materials from USP actually helps reduce development time. So by as much as 20 or 25%. So instead of every manufacturer having to develop these materials on their own. And then the third is sort of beyond standards. We, or more than 50% of our staff are scientists globally. So that's the USP staff. We also have a network of about 800 to 900 expert volunteers who help us develop our standards, who are organizing expert committees. So we have a huge network of expertise and knowledge that may be helpful in just solving problems or helping with expertise or guidance. So those are some of the specific things we're doing to support them. And in that effort, which has been going on for a couple of weeks now, we are in touch with a couple of companies who have reached out to us and say, hey, is it something that you can do here? And that's what we're researching now. One area that we heard from multiple sides actually is the area of validation of antibody tests. So, of course, it's very important once the pandemic goes into the next phases to make sure that we get a good picture of people who may have been exposed to the virus. What level of antibodies are they having? What kind of protection do they have? It's also important, of course, to in the clinical trials for vaccines, and that's an area where we've heard several parties that they would really they asked us to help them and maybe to convene an expert group to do this better for all.
On the other end of the spectrum, what are you doing with the manufacturers of existing products, some of which are being repurposed for treatment for this virus, and especially those that have been in short supply?
Mm-hmm. So some of these, as you mentioned, some of them like muscle relaxants and sedatives and painkillers. The first and foremost come back to what we did on the quality standards to make sure that they are aware that we have them, that they have them when they need them, etc. Having free access for 6 months to all of the materials that they need, from whether it's online or through our portals. So that's one thing. We're also very closely working with regulatory agencies, including US FDA, to them when they see questions coming up and see whether we do need to do anything when it comes to drugs coming into the country or drugs being repurposed. So that's an area that we're also very closely working together with our regulatory partners. And as you probably know, US FDA has for a long time, for over 100 years, ever since FDA exists, has been a very close partner of USP. So that's something that we are extending, and probably with a little bit more sense of urgency for sure, now that we need to respond quickly. But those are some of the things that we're doing. We're also standing ready to respond to any necessary revisions to our standards that are necessary. As you can imagine, when there are supply chain disruptions or new materials that need to be used to manufacture these medicines, sometimes that might result in different specifications or requirements. And we have a process to do that. And again, we would never do this on our own, but when needed and when asked by a regulatory agency, especially by the FDA or the manufacturers, to adapt these in a safe and effective manner, we stand ready to do this very quickly so that we do not cause any unnecessary time delays or compliance issues.
You mentioned compounders. In light of the shortages, what role are they playing currently, and what guidance are you giving them to ensure that they are following GMPs and safe manufacturing practices?
Yes, well, a couple of things actually, and this is a very active area for us right at the moment, and I also may ask Carrie to chip in because she's very close to this as well. So I'll offer a few things. I did mention the toolkit that are available to compounding pharmacies and other facilities, and they contain guidelines about compounding hand sanitizers from leading health organizations. We've incorporated materials from both domestic regulations, but also from WHO, to really have a one place where they can research those informations. We're also using our compounding expert committee. As I mentioned, we have the expert volunteers who are organizing the expert committee, and we have one specifically on compounding. And they convened very quickly to respond to the urgent needs. Very early on, we got in touch with, in that case, when Washington State was still one of the early hotspots in the U.S., we very early on got signals that they were in shortage of garbing and personal and protective equipment, so masks and gloves and those kinds of things that are needed for sterile compounding. And sterile compounding is, of course, a very important area that needs to continue. So what they did is they quickly, and when I say quickly, by the way, I should not fail to mention quickly does not mean sort of rash. We're still doing things thoughtfully to make sure that we do this on a science-based way. But to publish a technical guidance document or an operational guidance, so to speak, on our website that allows them to implement a risk-based approach. To make sure that they do the things that they can do given the situation that they're in, to make sure that they can take maximum use of the personal protective equipment. So we wrote guidance on whether or not to use disposable materials, or that it would be better to actually re-sanitize existing materials for another use. So those have been extremely helpful for dealing with those. And then the third piece is we also have standards for compounding formulation, so medicines that are made not in the commercial sort of standard way, but that are compounded locally by pharmacies, either local pharmacies, community pharmacies, or by outsourcing pharmacies. And we have those, and they are available for drugs that are currently being used in ICU setting, muscle relaxants, analgesics, painkillers, those kinds of things. So that's a very active area for us. And Carrie, I don't know whether you want to add anything to what I've already mentioned.
Yeah, thanks, Jaap. I think the only other thing I would mention was, as Jaap mentioned, our expert committee can convene very quickly to respond to challenges that we're hearing practitioners may be facing, especially with respect to compounding or the role of our standards. And so I'll just provide one other recent example where we've recently posted a guidance document on our website for operational considerations for sterile compounding during the pandemic. And as part of that, we did address the assignment of beyond use states, considerations for certification and recertification of some engineering controls, and recommendations for cleaning and disinfecting a facility when someone is sick. And so I think, I think it just kind of supports the different examples that Jaap gave in terms of trying to anticipate and then respond to where we're seeing challenges and recognizing the critical role that compounding can play, in particular, in making sure that we're offering the expertise of our committee members and staff to really respond to the challenges that they're facing.
Thank you, Agnes. Regulatory authorities and industry experts have long urged drug companies to adopt advanced manufacturing technologies. Now, the pandemic has emphasized the need for remote monitoring and control systems and biopharmaceutical manufacturing. During the past few years, companies have brought technologies with proven success in other industries or consumer applications to biopharma applications. Licia Diaz, lead application engineer with Applied Materials, shares her perspectives on how pharma can implement technology to monitor and control manufacturing processes. Licia, the pharma industry is frequently criticized for lagging other industries in the adoption of advanced manufacturing technologies. So, in which production areas do you see pharma lagging other industries?
So, pharma lags other industries in the digitization of manufacturing operations, in the deployment of advanced process control technologies, and in the automation of decision-making processes. One area that I have been personally involved with is scheduling. Pharma has had silos of scheduling instead of coordinating and synchronizing scheduling across production, maintenance, engineering, and quality control labs. Data availability, timeliness, and accuracy are also challenges in pharma. But this gets better as digital maturity increases. Also, the use of advanced technologies for optimization and programmatic decision-making versus ad hoc decisions lags other industries. And the results of optimized and coordinated schedules can be dramatic in terms of efficiency improvements, such as increases in throughput, OEE, and reductions in lead time and inventory.
Thank you. So how can monitoring and control systems support pharmaceutical manufacturing in accordance with good manufacturing practices, especially during emergencies such as we're now in?
The development of advanced real-time process analytics, monitoring, alerting, and reporting technologies boosts productivity and enables remote quality control. Remote quality control configurations can facilitate remote regulatory review and remote inspection oversight. Real-time reporting can enable efficient quality by design throughout the life cycle of process design, process qualification, continuous process verification, and automated APQR. We believe remote monitoring and scheduling can help drug manufacturing determine how best to optimize plants and labs so they can efficiently operate with the minimum number of personnel. Using digital twin techniques, what-if simulations can be conducted to help answer questions such as where to manufacture clinical trials, where to manufacture commercial vaccines and therapies, how many manufacturing lines are required, personnel requirements, and how to optimize the overall supply chain. Also, simulation can be used to help drug makers decide how best to transition from current products to urgent new products, while minimizing disruption and accelerating delivery. These solutions can be deployed without the need for travel and operated remotely. The software can run on-premise or in the cloud, and users can interact with the software via browser-based interfaces within a strict permission structure.
Beyond technology, the pandemic demands extreme focus, and biopharma companies have already been achieving tremendous results that promise to change the way drug development and manufacturers work in the future. Jaap Venema with USP shared his thoughts in this discussion with Agnes Shanley.
Maybe the impression that all of this would take very, very long. In a normal world, these things have certain true times because, there are several projects going on and not everybody is focused on fully one thing. This is not a normal world. So we are hearing from our customers, but also internally, it's like things that used to take 4 weeks now can be done in 4 days, but we're still doing it within our governance, within our established procedures. It's just that with everybody on it and everybody doing it, now we can do this. So I also want to create the impression that all of this should lead to unnecessary delays and times. When people get together, when focused, you can still do this in a good and thoughtful way, just in a fraction of the time that we are members. I would say our metrics are just changing almost every day, and surprised by how quickly things can be turned around and say, okay, we did this, we did it the right way, and it's ready. That's just what I wanted to add.
Yes. Well, people talk now, the pundits, about, this whole tragic pandemic, pressing a kind of a reset button for, social relationships, for the way people behave and interact. Is this also doing that for the industry, just raising awareness of the need to streamline and to, collaborate better and more efficiently? Are there some lessons that can be drawn and used always, in the future, whether or not it's a pandemic or not, that people are learning during this period?
I wholeheartedly agree, and I sincerely hope that we as a society, but just keeping it to medicine quality and medicine production, learn from this and address some of the critical issues around transparency, collaboration, resilience, the need to apply resources to make sure that we get the right quality. Hopefully we'll understand that we probably haven't done enough collectively to make sure that we prepare for these circumstances. And let's hope that the lessons learned is that we don't, whenever this is over, we don't go back to the old ways and really learn from this and incorporate this, how to do things better in the future.
We hope that this public health crisis is soon resolved, and clearly the industry will be key in its resolution. Approaches and technologies that companies are using today seem to be much more than just a temporary response or adaptation to emergency conditions. They have the potential to change forever the way manufacturers and developers work with partners, vendors, regulators, and customers in the future. We also want to hear your thoughts. Please add your comments and questions to a survey that will appear at the end of this event. And we want to use your input to shape future events. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I want to thank the audience for attending and participating in today's event. I also like to thank our sponsors, AbbVie Contract Manufacturing, Applied Materials, and Honeywell for making today's presentation possible. You'll receive an email alerting you when this webcast will be available for replay. I invite you to forward that announcement to any of your colleagues who may have missed today's event. A final reminder, stay up to date on activities for Interfex, scheduled for July 15th to the 17th. Pharmaceutical Technology and BioPharm International are hosting a number of keynote sessions during the event, and we hope to see you there. Thank you for joining us, and have a good day.